Do you believe there are places that should remain empty? That certain doors should never be opened? Because what you are about to discover will make you question everything you think about reality. Don't go in there. Those were the last words Marcus Johnson managed to say before collapsing in the Riverside Mall parking lot at 6:37 a.m. on March 15th. When paramedics arrived that cold day in Omaha, Nebraska, they found a 42-year-old man, a decorated Navy veteran, trembling uncontrollably, his eyes fixed on the mall entrance as if he were seeing something no one else could see. Marcus wasn't just anyone. This man had served in Iraq, faced life-or-death situations, seen things most of us only know from movies. He was known for his unwavering calm and impeccable professionalism. So when his co-workers saw the state he was in that morning, the reaction was almost unanimous. They laughed. They said he'd snapped, that he'd made it all up, that he was probably under the influence of some substance. After all, how could a war veteran be broken by a night alone in an empty shopping mall? But 3 weeks later, when the security cameras were finally reviewed by the Omaha police, something changed completely. The laughter ceased. Silence filled the police station. Because what those recordings showed transformed a simple abandoned shopping mall into the most disturbing place in the United States. Have you ever had that feeling that something is watching you even when you're completely alone? Stay with me until the end of this story, because what Marcus Johnson experienced that night goes far beyond any logical explanation. Riverside Mall was just another one of hundreds of forgotten malls scattered across America, awaiting demolition, lifeless and without movement. At least that's what everyone thought. But there's something in that place, something Marcus discovered in the worst possible way, and today, for the first time, you'll have access to the complete details. The records the police tried to keep secret, the images that should never have been seen. What you're about to discover may surprise you, may frighten you, and will certainly make you think twice before entering any abandoned place. Because the truth about that night is far darker than anyone could have imagined. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. If you're feeling that shiver right now, that strange sensation running down your spine, leave a comment below describing what you're feeling. Write to me. Do you believe that places can hold things we can't explain? Have you ever worked alone at night somewhere and felt that something wasn't right? Because look, every comment you leave here isn't just any interaction. It's a way of showing that stories like Marcus's need to be told, that real experiences like this deserve attention. And you know what else? When you like this video, when you subscribe to the channel and activate that little bell, you're saying, I want more truths that nobody dares to tell. I'm not afraid to look at the unknown. Your participation here is literally what makes this channel grow and reach more people who, like you, want to understand the mysteries that happen around us every day. Each, like each subscription, is a vote of confidence that you want to continue this journey with me, discovering cases that defy logic and that the mainstream media prefers to ignore. So go ahead, hit that like button now, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications, because I guarantee that after you discover the whole truth about what happened to Marcus Johnson that night, you'll want to be here when I bring you the next case, and believe me, there's much more to come. Now let's get to what really matters. Let's understand who Marcus Johnson was before that fateful night. Marcus Johnson was no ordinary man, and that needs to be very clear from the outset. We're talking about a decorated U.S. Navy veteran, a man who served 2 tours in Iraq between 2004 and 2008, who saw real combat, who made decisions under extreme pressure in situations where most of us would collapse. Marcus was the father of 2 daughters, 15-year-old Emily and 12-year-old Sarah, girls he raised alone after his divorce in 2016. His friends and family described him with the same words: calm, centered, unwavering. He was the kind of person you want by your side in a crisis, someone whose mindset was forged in the literal fire of war. After returning from military service, Marcus could have chosen any path. He had training, medals, connections. But the transformation that war works on people is something profound and permanent. Marcus didn't want more adrenaline. He didn't want more life or death decisions. He wanted peace, predictability, routine. That's how, in 2018, he accepted a job as a night watchman at Riverside Mall, a shopping center that was once the pride of Omaha in the 90s, when entire families spent weekends among the department stores, the crowded food court, and the six-screen movie theater, always with huge lines. But time waits for no one, and with the arrival of online shopping and the 2008 economic crisis, Riverside Mall slowly died, store by store, until it became a concrete and glass skeleton awaiting demolition. For Marcus, this was the perfect job. Quiet, predictable, no surprises. Nothing that could trigger the post-traumatic stress he still carried from his missions in the Middle East. He always made his rounds at the same time with military precision. 11 p.m., 12:15 a.m., 1:30 a.m., 3:15 p.m., 4:30 p.m. He checked the same doors in the same sequence, looked at the same security cameras, noted the same observations in the report. For 5 years doing exactly that, 6 nights a week, absolutely nothing had ever happened. Not a break-in, not a homeless person trying to take shelter, not even a stray raccoon. The Riverside Mall was a silent tomb of a bygone era, and Marcus was its solitary guardian. But there's something about routine that people don't realize. It creates an illusion of control, a false sense that you know all the patterns, all the variables. The hidden truth is that routine also leaves us vulnerable, because when something breaks that pattern, when the impossible finally happens, our minds simply aren't prepared to process the impact. And that's exactly what happened on the night of March 14th, a night that began like all the other 1,800 nights before, but that would end by completely destroying everything Marcus Johnson thought he knew about reality. Because at 11:15 p.m. that Thursday, when Marcus Johnson began his first round, something was already completely different. It was 11:15 p.m. Marcus Johnson walked through the main entrance of the Riverside Mall with his magnetic badge, as he had done every night for the past 5 years. The security system beeped familiarly, the corridor emergency. Lights flashed confirming his entry, and he proceeded to the control desk to register the start of his shift. Everything was perfectly normal. The mall was exactly as always, empty corridors stretching in all 3 main directions, shops boarded up with plywood covering the windows, that characteristic echo of abandoned places that amplifies every sound until it becomes almost ghostly. The air had that musty smell mixed with industrial cleaning products, an odor that Marcus no longer noticed after so long. But that night there was something different, something subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely present. Marcus felt it immediately as he began his walk down the first floor. It was a feeling he knew very well, something his military experience had deeply ingrained in his survival instinct, that acute awareness that something is wrong, even when you can't quite pinpoint what. In Iraq, that instinct had saved his life 3 times. It was as if the air had become denser, as if the silence had a texture. Marcus stopped in the middle of the central corridor, closed his eyes for a moment and just listened. Nothing. But the nothing was different. He continued his rounds, climbing the deactivated escalators to the 2nd floor, then to the 3rd. It was there, near the old food court where 8 different restaurants once operated, and now only abandoned counters and stacked chairs remained, that Marcus heard it for the first time. A low, almost imperceptible sound coming from the east corridor. He stopped immediately, his hand instinctively going to the radio strapped to his belt, his ears alert. There it was again, like footsteps, but not exactly footsteps. It was more of a dragging, irregular sound, as if someone were walking with difficulty or dragging something heavy across the marble floor. The sound echoed strangely off the empty walls, making it impossible to determine the exact distance. Marcus grabbed his tactical flashlight, the same one he used in military service, and shone its powerful beam down the corridor. Shadows danced on the walls, but nothing moved. The sound had stopped the moment he turned on the flashlight. That in itself was strange. Any normal person would have kept walking or responded to the light. Marcus began walking towards the sound, his own footsteps echoing in a steady, controlled rhythm. The journey down the 20 meters of that corridor seemed to last an eternity. Every decision he made at that moment was calculated, automatic, the result of years of training. Keep the flashlight high, check the corners, never turn his back on an unchecked space. Security, identify yourself. Marcus's voice echoed through the empty corridor, firm and authoritative. Nothing. Only the heavy silence that had taken over the mall. He waited 10 seconds, mentally counting as he had learned in tactical training. No response. No movement. And then, when Marcus was about 5 meters from the end of the corridor, he saw the door of the old Toyland store, a toy store that had closed in 2015, was open. Not just unlocked, wide open. And Marcus felt his stomach churn because he himself had checked that door 6 hours earlier, at the end of his previous shift. That door was always the first item on his security checklist, and he was absolutely certain it was locked. The revelation of that moment changed everything, because if that door was open now, it meant that someone or something had entered the mall after he left. And if you're feeling the same chills Marcus felt at that moment, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now, because this story is just beginning, and the impact of what comes next will completely change your perception of what is possible or impossible. Marcus approached the open door, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness inside the shop, and what he saw inside made all his military training seem completely useless. Marcus's flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside Toyland, and what he saw in the first few seconds simply didn't make sense. The store was completely ransacked, but not in the chaotic way you'd expect from a robbery or vandalism. There was a pattern. The boxes of old toys that still remained in the abandoned stockroom were deliberately meticulously stacked, forming the walls of a corridor that ran from the entrance to the back of the store. It was as if someone had spent hours building it with a specific purpose, creating a path that forced anyone who entered to follow exactly that route. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He himself had locked that door 6 hours earlier at 5:30 p.m., as he always did. That door was literally the first on his security checklist, and he was absolutely unwaveringly certain that it was locked. He approached slowly, his right hand instinctively reaching for the radio strapped to his belt, while his left held the flashlight steady. Each step was calculated, controlled, but inside. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Iraq, genuine fear mixed with utter confusion, because this wasn't the work of teenage vandals or homeless people seeking shelter. There was a disturbing intentionality to it all. The crates formed walls approximately 6 feet high, completely blocking the side view, creating a claustrophobic tunnel that forced anyone entering to look only ahead. And at the end of this makeshift corridor, illuminated by the beam of Marcus's flashlight, was the back wall of the store. Written on that wall in what appeared to be bright, dripping red paint was a message in large, irregular letters: "He is awake." The letters were about 30 centimeters high each, made with thick, trembling strokes, as if the writer had been in a hurry or had shaking hands. Marcus felt his military training kick in automatically. He took 3 steps back, keeping the flashlight pointed inside the store, and with his free hand picked up the radio. The decision was clear. Call the Omaha Police, isolate the area, not touch anything that could be evidence. His fingers were already pressing the transmit button when he heard it. The sound came from behind him, from the main corridor of the mall. Footsteps, but not just a couple of footsteps, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Running. The noise was deafening, echoing off the marble and glass walls of the 3rd floor, creating a cacophony of rhythmic impacts that seemed to come from all sides simultaneously. Marcus turned abruptly, the beam of his flashlight sweeping the empty corridor ahead of him. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The corridor was completely deserted. The same closed shops, the same construction barriers, the same emergency lighting casting that characteristic yellowish light. But the footsteps continued. Not only did they continue, but they were getting louder, closer, more intense. The psychological impact of that moment was devastating for Marcus, because he wasn't dealing with something his military mindset could process. There was no visible enemy, no tangible threat, just that impossible sound of dozens of people running towards him from a completely empty space. The footsteps now seemed to be coming from all sides, from the corridor ahead, from the closed shops next door, from above, from below, as if the building itself had come to life and was running in circles around him. Marcus backed up until his back was against the wall, the flashlight being frantically moved from side to side, the radio still in his hand, trembling slightly. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, everything stopped. Absolute silence, as if someone had pressed a mute button on reality. The transformation in that silence was even more terrifying than the sound, because now Marcus was certain he wasn't alone in the Riverside Mall, and whatever was there with him, it didn't follow the normal rules of the reality he knew. The hidden truth was beginning to reveal itself, and the backstage of that abandoned mall held something far beyond his comprehension. Marcus knew he had two choices at that moment: run for the exit or go to the security room to check the cameras. The decision Marcus made at that moment defined the kind of man he was. All his military training, all his combat experience, all his survival instinct screamed one thing: get out of there now, run for the exit, lock the doors, call for reinforcements, and never come back. But something stronger was operating within him at that moment. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was the need to understand what was happening. Perhaps it was simply the refusal to accept that something impossible was occurring. Marcus needed answers. He needed to see with his own eyes what was causing this. So he ran, but not towards the exit. He ran through the corridors of the third floor, sped down the stairs to the first floor, and headed straight for the security room located at the back of the mall, near the loading and unloading area. His hands trembled as he unlocked the reinforced steel door, rushed inside, and locked it from the inside with the security bolt. The room was small, about 3 meters by 4, with 12 wall-mounted surveillance monitors, a central computer, and an old swivel chair. Marcus set the flashlight on the table, sat down in front of the monitors, and began activating the live cameras, one by one. The transformation of his facial expression as the images appeared on the screens went from confusion to complete shock, because what he was seeing simply didn't match what he had just experienced. On the 12 monitors, showing every angle of the Riverside Mall's 3 floors, he could see everything, every corridor, every corner, every common area, and it was all completely empty. There was no one, no figures, no suspicious shadows, no movement beyond the cameras making their automatic focus adjustments. Marcus leaned closer to the screens, his eyes scanning every inch of the black and white images. Nothing. The third floor where he had just been, empty. The hallway in front of Toyland, deserted. The toy store itself, with that bizarre aisle of stacked boxes, was there on camera number 7, exactly as he had seen it, but there was absolutely no one inside or nearby. Marcus ran a hand over his face, trying to process it all. Could he have hallucinated it all? No, impossible. He had heard those footsteps. He had felt the impact of that sound on his chest. It was real. It had to be real. And it was at that exact moment that the footsteps began again. Only now they were banging directly against the steel door of the security room. Bang, bang, bang. Loud, rhythmic, metallic blows, making the entire door vibrate within its structure. Marcus jumped to his feet, knocking the chair back, his eyes fixed on the door. He approached slowly, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his own ears. There was a security peephole at eye level, a small piece of reinforced glass that allowed him to see who was on the other side. Marcus put his face close to the peephole and looked. The hallway outside was completely empty. Empty. There was no one there. But the door continued to be struck with increasing force, the hinges beginning to creak under the pressure, the metal groaning as if it were about to give way at any moment. Marcus's mentality was being tested beyond any limit he knew. He quickly turned back to the monitors, searching for the camera. That showed exactly the corridor where he was, where the security room door was. Camera number 3. There was the door, visibly shaking from the impacts. But there was no one banging on it. No figure, no hand, nothing. The door was being attacked by something completely invisible. Marcus felt his legs weaken. He gripped the edge of the metal table to steady himself, forcing himself to take a deep breath, to think clearly. Then he had an idea. The recordings. He could pull up the recordings. from the last few minutes and see what had really happened. With trembling fingers, Marcus accessed the recording system and rewound 30 seconds. He pressed play and watched. There he was, running down the first-floor hallway toward the security room. The image showed Marcus alone, absolutely alone, running as if fleeing from something. But there was nothing behind him. The hallway was empty. In the recording, Marcus reached the door, unlocked it, went in, and closed it. Everything normal. But then Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. His shadow. In the recording, as he ran under the hallway's emergency lights, his shadow projected on the marble floor didn't move as it should. It didn't follow his movements. It moved independently, at its own pace, sometimes going in directions opposite to where Marcus was running, sometimes stopping completely while he continued moving. The hidden truth was there, recorded on digital video, irrefutable. Marcus's journey had just crossed a line separating the possible from the impossible, and there was no turning back. If you can feel the terror Marcus was feeling at that moment, if your heart is racing like his was, then you need to subscribe to this channel now, because this story is far from over, and the following revelations will challenge everything you believe about reality. Marcus looked back at the live monitors, searching for his own shadow on the security room camera, and what he saw made his hands begin to tremble uncontrollably. Marcus forced his hands to stop trembling. He needed to understand what was happening, and the recordings were the only source of objective truth he had at that moment. With still unsteady fingers, he accessed the video archive from the night and began to rewind. 2 hours back. 9 p.m., the exact time the mall had officially closed. On the 12 screens in front of him, Marcus saw the last lights in the main areas go out, the automated system doing its routine work. Everything absolutely normal. The empty corridors, the shops already closed and locked, no movement beyond the occasional adjustments of the cameras themselves. Marcus took a deep breath, almost convincing himself that he had imagined it all, that post-traumatic stress had finally overcome his disciplined mindset. But then, at 9:37 p.m., something appeared on camera number 1, which showed the main entrance to the first floor. A figure. Marcus froze the image and zoomed in. The video quality wasn't perfect, but it was enough to see that it wasn't human. Not in the way it should be. The figure was tall, disproportionately tall, perhaps 2 meters and 40 centimeters or even more, with limbs far too long for its torso. And the way it moved was deeply disturbing. It was like watching someone who had never walked before trying to imitate human movement. Each step was uneven, clumsy, the knees bending at angles that didn't seem natural. Marcus pressed play again and watched as the figure slowly crossed the first floor. What happened next made Marcus's stomach churn. The figure began entering each store methodically, one after the other, following a specific sequence. First the old Macy's department store in the west corner, then the Radio Shack electronics store, then the Borders bookstore. And wherever this thing went, the emergency lights that Marcus had seen working perfectly began to flicker erratically and then died completely, leaving that section of the mall in total darkness. It was as if the very presence of that figure drained the electrical energy from the environment. Marcus felt a chill run through his entire body as he watched it unfold on the recordings. The transformation of the mall from an empty but illuminated place into a labyrinth of shadows was happening right there, recorded on digital video. He fast-forwarded the video. 22:15 minutes. The figure was now on the second floor, repeating the same meticulous pattern, entering each abandoned shop, the lights dying in its path. 22:50 minutes. Third floor. Marcus paused the recording and felt his heart race violently, because he recognized exactly the path that thing was following. It was identical, step by step, to the route he took every night on his security patrol. First the west wing, then the central corridor, then the east wing, ending in the old food court. It was the same route Marcus had taken thousands of times in the last 5 years. How did that thing know? How could it know his routine so perfectly? The revelation of that moment was devastating for Marcus. It wasn't random, it wasn't a coincidence. Whatever was in that mall had planned this. It was waiting for him, specifically. Marcus continued watching, his breathing quickening with each passing second. And then, at 11:10 p.m., exactly 5 minutes before Marcus was due to begin his rounds that night, the figure did something that transformed Marcus's fear into absolute terror. It stopped walking. It stopped right in the middle of the third-floor hallway near the old food court, exactly where Marcus would first hear those shuffling footsteps. And then, slowly, that impossible form turned and looked directly at the security camera. Marcus zoomed in as much as the system allowed, and what he saw made him recoil from his chair. Where there should have been a human face, where there should have been eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was only a smooth, dark surface. But it wasn't. Static darkness. It was darkness that moved, that flowed like thick liquid constantly rippling, creating patterns that changed every second, and although there were no visible eyes, Marcus could feel with every fiber of his being that that thing was looking directly at him through the camera. Not at the camera, but through it, as if it could see beyond time, as if it knew that Marcus would be there at that exact moment, hours later, watching that recording. The hidden truth behind the scenes of that night was far worse than any nightmare Marcus had had in Iraq. He stood paralyzed, staring at that frozen image on the screen, the liquid darkness where there should have been a face, and then he noticed something even more disturbing. On the live monitors on the camera that showed the exact same third-floor hallway in real time, there was something there now. A shadow. Just a shadow without a body to project it, moving slowly down the empty hallway. And it was coming towards the security room. Marcus looked at the locked door of the security room and then back at the monitors, and it was at that moment that he realized the footsteps stopped, and somehow that sudden silence was infinitely worse than all the impossible noise that had come before. Marcus stood completely still in the security room, his breath caught in his throat, every muscle in his body tense, waiting for any sound, any movement, any indication of what was to come. But there was only silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, that presses against your ears until it hurts. Marcus looked at the digital clock on the wall. 43 minutes past midnight. There were still more than 5 hours until dawn, until the day shift arrived, until there were other people in the mall. 5 hours that felt like an eternity. He knew, with the cold clarity of someone who had already faced life or death decisions, that he had 2 options at that moment. First option, stay locked inside the security room until dawn, not leave for anything, wait for daylight and the arrival of other people. Second option, try to leave now, run to the main exit of the mall, risk crossing those dark corridors where that thing was waiting. Any rational person would choose the first option. Stay locked up, safe, until all this ended somehow. But something inside Marcus, something he couldn't fully name, prevented him from simply shrinking back and waiting. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was a refusal to accept defeat. Maybe it was simply denial, the part of his brain that still insisted there had to be a logical explanation for all of this. Marcus forced himself to look at the monitors one more time. His eyes scanned the 12 screens, examining every angle of the mall. And then he saw it, the figure. It was there, standing directly in front of the security room door. Marcus could see it perfectly on camera number 3, which showed the corridor where he was. That tall, disproportionate shape was completely still, less than 2 meters from the steel door that separated Marcus from that thing. The dark mass where the head should have been was turned towards the camera, and even through the low-resolution screen, Marcus could feel that eyeless gaze fixed on him. But when Marcus looked through the security peephole on the door, the corridor outside was empty, completely empty. There was nothing. But on the camera, the figure remained there, motionless, waiting. And then, the impossible happened. Marcus was looking at the 12 monitors when the image on camera number 3 began to change. It was no longer an external view of the hallway. It was an internal view of the security room. From inside the room where Marcus was at that exact moment, the camera was showing Marcus's back, showing him sitting in the chair looking at the monitors. Marcus felt his brain freeze trying to process it. There were no cameras inside the security room. He was looking at all the monitors and They only showed the exterior areas of the mall, but there on screen number 3, he was seeing himself from behind, as if someone were filming from inside the room with him. The transformation of that reality into something completely incomprehensible was happening right before Marcus's eyes. On the screen, he saw the steel door behind him begin to slowly open, the security bolt turning on its own, the heavy door moving inward. Marcus spun violently, in utter panic, looking at the actual door. Behind him, it was closed, completely closed. The bolt was in place, locked as he had left it. There was no one there. But when he looked back at the monitor, the door on the screen continued to open, inch by inch, revealing absolute darkness on the other side. The psychological impact of that moment was devastating, because Marcus was being confronted with two simultaneous and contradictory realities. The physical reality around him showed a locked door and an empty room. But the reality shown on the screen revealed something completely different, something that was happening in a parallel dimension, or in an imminent future that he couldn't comprehend. Marcus's military mindset, all his experience, all his training, simply didn't have the tools to deal with it. In the depths of his consciousness, something was beginning to break. The hidden truth of that night wasn't just that something impossible was happening, it was that reality itself was fragmenting around him. Marcus watched, mesmerized by horror, as the door on the screen swung open completely. And then he saw, through that impossible camera angle, something begin to enter the room through that door that only existed on the monitor. It was the figure. That tall, disproportionate shape was entering the security room through an opening that didn't exist in physical reality. Marcus could see on the screen that dark mass approaching him from behind, closer and closer, while in reality, everything around him remained exactly as it was. Marcus's journey through that night had reached a breaking point. He was no longer sure what was real and what wasn't. If you're feeling the same existential terror that Marcus was experiencing, if your mind is struggling to process what's happening here, then you need to subscribe to this channel now. Because the final revelations of this story will show you a truth about reality that very few people know. Marcus made the only decision that still made sense to him in that moment of utter despair. He unlocked the door and ran. Marcus completely broke down at that moment. All the military discipline, all the emotional control he had built up over years of service and combat simply crumbled. He jumped from his chair with such force that it tipped backward. His hands went straight to the steel door latch, and he opened it with a violent movement. The only thing that mattered now was getting out of there, getting out of the mall, getting out of that impossible reality unfolding around him. Marcus opened the door and ran like he had never run in his entire life. Not even in Iraq, not even in the most intense Navy training, had he run with such desperation as at that moment. He sprinted down the first-floor hallway toward the main entrance, his feet pounding against the marble floor in a frantic rhythm. And behind him, Marcus could hear something coming. It wasn't normal footsteps like before. It was something being dragged across the floor, a heavy, damp sound of something moving too fast for the kind of movement that was producing that noise, and it was getting faster, faster and faster, getting closer. Marcus didn't look back even once. He just ran, pumping his arms, pushing his legs to their limit. As he ran, the mall's emergency lights began to explode above his head, one after another, in sequence, following exactly the path he was taking. Each bulb shattered with a sound of glass breaking, raining fragments that cut through the air. Around him, the shop windows he passed began to crack spontaneously, fracture lines spreading across the tempered glass like spiderwebs, then exploding inward in cascades of sharp shards. The sensory impact was devastating. The sound of breaking glass, exploding lights, and that horrible sound of something crawling closer and closer behind him. Marcus turned into the main corridor leading to the entrance. He could see the double-glazed exit doors about 50 meters ahead. Freedom, safety, the normal world outside. And it was at that moment that he heard the voice. It was his own voice, but it didn't come from a single place. It came from all sides of the mall simultaneously, echoing off the walls, the ceiling, the floor, as if the building itself were speaking with Marcus's voice. "Marcus," the voice said, calm, almost affectionate. "Why are you running from yourself?" The words echoed in perfect unison from dozens of different directions, creating a disturbing harmony. Marcus felt tears begin to stream down his face as he ran. The transformation of his mental state was complete. He was no longer the controlled and disciplined veteran. He was just a terrified man fleeing from something his mind simply couldn't process. He reached the main doors of the Riverside Mall and pushed with all his might. Locked. Impossible. Marcus knew the emergency exit code by heart. He had used that code thousands of times. His fingers flew to the digital panel beside the doors and typed in the sequence. Nothing. The system didn't respond. The screen remained dark, dead, as if it had never had power. Marcus began pounding on the glass doors with his fists, punching with all his might, screaming for help, even though he knew there was no one outside to hear him. And that's when he felt it. A cold hand, icy as ice, landed on his right shoulder. The touch pierced the fabric of his uniform and seemed to penetrate directly into his skin, muscles, bones. Marcus froze completely. Every fiber of his being screamed not to turn around, not to look, but his body moved independently of his will. He turned slowly, and when his eyes focused on what was behind him, his sanity finally gave way. It was his own face, but distorted, completely wrong in every detail. His eyes were slightly further apart than they should be, his mouth was too wide, and he was smiling. Smiling in a way that a human face simply shouldn't be able to, the corners of his mouth rising almost to touch his ears, revealing teeth that were too numerous and too sharp. The hidden truth that unfolded behind the scenes that night finally revealed itself completely to Marcus in that moment of absolute horror. It wasn't trying to hurt him. It was trying to be him, to replace him, to become him in a way that transcended all human comprehension. In that instant, something fundamental broke within Marcus Johnson's mind. The last barrier of rationality, the last anchor to shared reality, simply crumbled. He doesn't remember what happened afterward. There's no memory of how he left the mall, how he got through those locked doors, how he reached the parking lot outside. Marcus only woke up 6 hours later, lying on the cold asphalt of the Riverside Mall parking lot, with the sun rising on the horizon and the golden morning light bathing everything around him. When the paramedics arrived and found Marcus, he was repeating only 3 words over and over again. When paramedics arrived at the Riverside Mall parking lot at 6:37 a.m. on March 15th, Marcus was lying on his back on the cold asphalt, his eyes wide open, fixed on the brightening sky, repeating only 3 words incessantly: "Don't go in there, don't go in there, don't go in there." He was in a state of deep shock, trembling uncontrollably despite the relatively mild morning temperature. Paramedics wrapped him in thermal blankets and immediately transported him to Omaha Medical Center. When the Omaha police were notified of the incident, the initial reaction was complete skepticism. A veteran night watchman having a mental breakdown in an abandoned mall. The obvious conclusion seemed to be post-traumatic stress, perhaps exacerbated by substance use, or simply the accumulated burden of working alone every night in an empty and depressing place. Marcus's coworkers laughed when they heard his initial account. They said he'd probably fallen asleep on the job and had a bad nightmare. Some were even more cruel, making jokes about veterans who couldn't handle the pressure, even in simple jobs. The transformation of public opinion about Marcus was brutal and instantaneous, from a respected professional to an object of ridicule. But 3 weeks later, when the police finally decided to review the Riverside Mall's security camera footage as a purely formality, the laughter stopped completely, because everything Marcus had said was true. Every impossible detail, every moment of horror he had described was there, recorded on high-definition digital video. The disproportionate figure moving through the corridors, the lights dying in sequence, the doors opening by themselves, and that final image of the faceless thing staring directly at the camera. Detective Michael Chen, a 22-year veteran of the Omaha Police Force who had seen practically everything, paled as he watched the recordings. He immediately assembled a full investigative team and began doing something that would change everything. Historical research on the land where the Riverside Mall had been built. And that's when the truly disturbing revelations began to emerge from behind the scenes of the official story. The Riverside Mall, inaugurated with great fanfare in 1992, had been built on the ruins of something far more sinister. The land had been from 1923 to 1957 the site of the Nebraska State Psychiatric Hospital, known locally as Riverside Asylum. On October 15, 1957, a fire of never fully clarified origin completely destroyed the east wing of the hospital, killing 47 patients trapped in their locked cells. The impact of that tragedy on the Omaha community was devastating at the time, but over the decades, the memory had faded almost completely. The hospital records had been transferred to the state archives and then digitized, and it was there, in yellowed scanned documents, that Detective Chen found something that chilled his blood. Among the patients who were at Riverside Asylum on the night of the fire, there was one identified only as Patient 19. There was no real name in the records, only that number. And next to the number, a shocking note: escaped during the fire, never located, search suspended after 6 months. Chen continued reading Patient 19's medical files, and what he discovered completely transformed the nature of the investigation. In a medical note dated April 1957, just 6 months before the fire, the attending physician had written, "Patient presence persistent and increasingly. Elaborate mirror delusions. Firmly believes he can inhabit the reflections and shadows of other people. Demonstrates detailed knowledge of staff routines that he could never have observed from his cell. I recommend complete isolation from any reflective surface." The hidden truth about what Marcus had faced that night was beginning to take shape through historical research. Armed with this information, Detective Chen personally led a team of 6 officers on a thorough investigation of the Riverside Mall's interior. What they found in the former Toyland toy store confirmed their worst fears. Beneath the message, "He is awake," written in red ink on the back wall, there was another message written in smaller letters with what appeared to be the same substance: "Patient 19 free since 0314. The exact date of that night, the date of Marcus's collapse. But the most disturbing discovery came when the team began to methodically examine the entire mall, scattered throughout all 3 floors, hidden in corners, behind columns, inside ventilation ducts. They found thousands of small mirrors. Thousands. Pieces of mirrored glass, some no bigger than coins, others the size of plates, all carefully positioned at specific angles. And when Chen mapped the position of all those mirrors, he perceived the pattern with growing horror. They were all positioned to reflect exactly the corridors where Marcus made his nightly rounds. Each mirror captured a piece of the route Marcus had followed every night for 5 years. Marcus's journey hadn't been random for that thing. It had studied his every move through those reflections. For how long? Months? Years? If you're getting goosebumps right now, if you're starting to understand the magnitude of what Marcus faced, then you need to subscribe to this channel immediately, because the conclusion of this story will reveal something about reality that will make you question everything. And there was one more thing that the police discovered in that investigation, something that was not disclosed to the public. The discovery that the police made in that investigation, but which was never officially released to the public, was in the last recordings from the security cameras. Detective Chen and his team reviewed every second of video from that night, and what they found in the final minutes was so disturbing that an immediate decision was made at the highest levels of the Omaha Police Department. 3 weeks after the incident with Marcus Johnson, the Riverside Mall was completely demolished. The official decision cited serious structural issues and risk to public safety, but there were considerable protests from historical preservation groups who argued that the building had architectural value and could be restored. These protests were ignored. The bulldozers arrived on a Monday morning, and in 48 hours of continuous work, the Riverside Mall was reduced to rubble and debris. Marcus Johnson never worked as a night watchman again. In fact, he never worked in security of any kind again. The transformation that night wrought in him was profound and permanent. He spent 6 weeks in intensive psychiatric treatment, dealing with the trauma of that impossible experience. When he was finally discharged, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He became a public advocate for mental health for war veterans, traveling throughout Nebraska and neighboring states, speaking at events, schools, and community centers about the importance of recognizing and treating post-traumatic stress. His work in this area has been genuinely impactful, helping hundreds of veterans find the resources and support they need. But there's one thing Marcus never ever talks about in detail: that night at the Riverside Mall. When journalists ask, when curious people try to extract information, when even close friends question what really happened, Marcus has only one standardized answer, that he repeats with a distant look. Some things shouldn't be remembered, because the more you remember them, the more they remember you. This phrase, spoken with deep conviction and barely disguised fear, is all anyone can get out of him about that night. His daughters, Emily and Sarah, know they shouldn't ask. His current therapist knows that topic is absolutely forbidden in sessions. The hidden truth about what Marcus experienced remains locked inside him. The security cameras at Riverside Mall, those 12 monitors that recorded everything, were destroyed by the Omaha Police. Officially, the report cites standard procedure for disposing of evidence after the conclusion of the investigation. But there are rumors, whispers from behind the scenes at the police department that have leaked over the years. Rumors about the last recording, the one made at 6:36 a.m. on March 15th, exactly 1 minute before Marcus was found unconscious in the parking lot. According to these rumors, which have never been officially confirmed or denied, that final recording showed something absolutely terrifying. It showed Marcus Johnson calmly walking back into Riverside Mall through the main doors, entering the building with firm steps and clear purpose. Meanwhile, simultaneously on the same recording, another Marcus Johnson lay completely unconscious on the asphalt of the parking lot 50 meters away. Two versions of the same man, one walking inside, one lying outside, both clearly visible in the same camera recording, at the same timestamp, at the same impossible moment in reality. The impact of this revelation, if true, would be devastating not only for Marcus, but for any rational understanding of how the world works. Therefore, according to rumors, Detective Chen personally oversaw the complete destruction of all recordings, ensuring that no copy existed on any server, no backup, no file. The journey of that investigation ended with more questions than answers, and with a conscious decision to bury certain truths so deeply that they could never resurface. Today, if you drive down Riverside Street in Omaha, Nebraska, you'll see nothing but an empty lot where the mall used to stand. There are signs indicating that a residential complex will be built on the site, but for reasons no one can fully explain, construction never begins. Companies buy the land, make elaborate plans, obtain all the necessary permits, and then quietly abandon the project. The lot remains empty, an open wound in Omaha's urban landscape, and those who know the full story, those few who have access to the behind-the-scenes truth, prefer it to remain that way. Empty, unbuilt, undisturbed. Marcus Johnson continues his life, continues helping other veterans, continues being a present father to his daughters. But those who know him well notice small things. He never looks directly into mirrors anymore if he can avoid it. You're never alone in large buildings after dark. And on the rare occasions when someone mentions the Riverside Mall, even casually, Marcus falls completely silent for several minutes, his gaze lost somewhere in the distance, as if he were seeing something no one else can see. And now, I need to ask you a question that will keep echoing in your mind. Do you believe that there are things that should never be awakened, places that should remain empty, forgotten, buried under layers of time and concrete? Because after learning Marcus Johnson's story, after understanding what really happened in that abandoned mall in Omaha, it's difficult to look at empty buildings the same way, isn't it? If you've made it this far with me, if you've followed every second of this journey without skipping anything, leave a comment here. I'm with you until the end. I read all the comments personally, and that's what shows me that there are real people on the other side. People who aren't afraid to face these truths that most prefer to ignore. And tell me too, would you go into that mall if you had the chance? Or are there doors that simply shouldn't be opened, If this story moved you, if it made you question something about the reality you thought you knew, leave a like below. This isn't just a button, it's your way of telling me that we're connected in this search for stories that go beyond the surface, that challenge logic and make us think. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's the time. Every week, I bring you real cases like this one. Stories that mainstream media doesn't have the courage to tell. Events that actually happened, but defy everything we thought possible. Don't miss the next ones, because I guarantee what's coming will surprise you even more. And look, there's a video over here that you need to watch right now. Stick with me there, because the next story might be even more disturbing than this one. See you soon.